Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel and to my podcast, which is all about, it's for free thinkers who are focused on self development and living authentically. Today I was just thinking that I really do believe the world is entering a period of authenticity. And so if people have been scared of being authentic for whatever reason. And the times we're living in right now is the best time to be living in your own authenticity. Because I do believe the world is heading that way. And so if you don't want to, I don't know what's the right word, but if you don't want to, fall behind in a way and, authenticity is the way to go. I mean, it's always been the way to go, but to me, like we live in a time where it's a lot more safer to be authentic. Even 5 years ago, it was more dangerous to be authentic than it is now. Obviously, there's its own. Life is always going to be full of challenges, unless we solve these challenges and we're able to make the world an actual heaven, but we don't live there now. So please, think about that. And obviously my audience is you guys are interested in in living authentically and are focused on self-development. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but I really do believe that. But today I thought I'd make a video and sort of like introduce you guys to kind of other stuff I do outside of my attempts at becoming a YouTuber. But for those of you who don't know, I am a writer and poet, and so I published a collection of poems last year around November. And there's a whole backstory about the process of me getting this collection published, which I want to go through in this video. So the other thing is I studied creative writing at university. So I've got a degree in creative writing, and it was when I was studying my undergraduate, it was an amazing time there, because when I started my undergrad, it was at the height of when I was beginning to question my entire life, question more overtly, question more directly, and I was more serious about like coming to a conclusion about my life and who I am and all that sort of stuff. So it was a perfect time to actually start that undergrad, and I was in my late 20s at the time, and I was introduced to all these kinds of ideas, and I love the university setting. If I could just spend my entire day, at the university, at the library, it would be fantastic, just reading and writing and doing all that sort of stuff. But it's also such a shame what universities have become. House a lot of charlatans, and a lot of it's become, from my experience, it's become a place where ideas are dangerous. But if there is a space where ideas are not scary, it should be university. But that's a whole other can of worms altogether. But anyway, I published this collection of poems called Stop All the Clocks, with this amazing small press called Verity La La, which is where you can purchase the book. I will add all the details of where you can get the book, my publisher's website, in the description box. And before I continue, I just want to say, please like, subscribe, and share this channel, this podcast, with anyone you think might be interested in, who's interested in self-development and living authentically. So Stop All the Clocks. What's it about? So this book, this collection contains 21 poems, and each poem is responding to a film that I love. So it's a collection of 21 poems responding to 21 films that I absolutely love, and that's kind of brought me comfort throughout my life and has added value and meaning to my life on a personal note. And so I've watched these films throughout my life in all the different stages of my life. And so yeah, the themes in the collection so the themes in the films relate to the themes of my life. So I am responding to the films by way of telling my story. So the three main themes in my life, major themes in my life, is my relationship with my abusive mother, me leaving Islam, and my relationship with Islam, and coming to terms with being gay. So I'm going to read, I might read two poems depending on how long it takes, but the first poem I'm going to read is a response to the film The Great Debaters with Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington is one of my favorite actors of all time. I absolutely adore him, and basically this story is inspired by a true story. It's set in Texas in 1935, where a professor teaches a group of college students, African American college students. He teaches them the art of argumentation, and he teaches them all about critical thinking. And so the whole story is about how he teaches them how to debate. They form this debate team, and then they win all these debates against other colleges, other universities, and to the point where they end up debating the best debate team at the time at Harvard University, and they end up winning it. It's this historical moment, and whilst all of that is going, there also is, the segregation was alive at the time, and so they're also dealing with that, and they're dealing with America's race relations at the time and what it was like to be African American at the time. And so you kind of see what their life is like outside of their studies, their college, and it's such an inspiring film. And what I particularly loved about this film is, despite what their society was like at the time, they were still able to transcend the hatred that was coming towards them, and that's what, and they pursued their interest, and they pursued knowledge, and I absolutely loved that despite the professor, he had his own political work that he did outside of his job as a professor, but he never imposed his ideas onto them. He didn't impose his ideas onto them. He was there, and he taught them skills for them to hone their own voice and to bring about their own unique voices. And so that kind of relationship was very interesting to me, because when I went to university and I enrolled in my Bachelor of Arts degree, I met a professor who was teaching. Who I met him, and he was my poetry teacher my first year of my undergrad. And so he was a Marxist, and he was a extreme atheist, and he had this like contempt for the West, which was so strange for me, because he's like a white Australian, and I never understood his like contempt for the West. He had a pretty good life. He was quote unquote educated, and but anyway, so he ended up we ended up forming I call this my poetry teacher, I call him Michael in this collection, although that's not actually his real name. So for the sake of the video, I'll just refer to him as Michael, my professor. So Michael and I ended up building a good professional working relationship, but we also did become friends. And so um, basically our relationship was about poetry and literature and ideas. And so I would send him poems, he would workshop the poems with me, he would send it back to me, we'd workshop it together, and that's kind of how it worked. I'd send him a poem, he'd help me edit it, send it back to me, and that was kind of our relationship when it comes to poetry. And so throughout my undergrad, we worked together in the capacity of poetry. So, and towards the end of my undergrad, he ended up publishing a collection of poems that I wrote many moons ago, back in 2018, that I published, and that collection was called From Grains to Gold, and it was the theme in the collection was grief, and in each chapter I go through the 5 stages of grief. So each chapter was dedicated to a stage of grief. So I ended up publishing that. And at the time, like I said, I was questioning everything about my life, Islam, my relationship with my mother, and coming to terms with being gay. And so at that time, I was kind of sympathetic to Marxist ideas because I did feel oppressed, and I'm being introduced to these ideas, and I'm sort of like learning language to kind of articulate oppression, which is something that I felt deeply at the time. And so I was sympathetic to it. However, I gotta compare Michael to Melvin. So Melvin's the professor, of which the Great Debate is based on. It's a true story. And so I compare Michael to Melvin because Melvin, I believe, did it the right way. You see, he didn't impose his ideas on his students. So he was teaching them the skills to think for themselves, right? Whereas Michael, my professor, was imposing his ideas on me. And so we had like a similar background insofar as he grew up Christian, ended up rebelling from Christianity, ended up leaving Christianity and becoming an atheist, right? And he ended up embracing the Enlightenment, freedom. I'll put it that way. Embracing the freedom that Australia had given to him, that his society had given to him. And so, just for context, I don't know if I said this, but he hates all religions. I think all religions are stupid. But to him, he gave Islam a special kind of category, right? Islam had a concession, and his rationale for giving Islam a concession, despite what Islam actually really is, despite his Marxist kind of ideology, because he was an extreme Marxist, and Marxism is a political, philosophical ideology that tells a particular narrative about history. So according to Marxism, all of history is about the oppressor versus the oppressed, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. And so that's the lens that he saw the world from. And so but he didn't apply that idea to Islam, because we do know that Islam is an expansionist ideology, which he did know. Islam is an imperialist ideology that oppresses, that is the oppressor and has its oppressed. But to him, because to him the West was the evil, oppressor, and the East were the poor victims. And so he had this altruistic fantasy about himself, where he was going to save all, people of the East, and anyone who was a person of color, he would save them. He was going to save them, and he was altruistic in that way. There's a kind of racism that was embedded in his altruism. And so anyway, so we're continuing to work together. We become friends. We're always discussing ideas, and we're debating ideas, and we're always disagreeing. For me, but I always thought that was just We just have a difference of opinion. For him, it was a frustration that was forever, that was growing, and he was growing resentful of the fact that I wasn't submitting to his worldview. You see, because he's there to save me, right? So I became a barrier. I became a barrier between him fulfilling his fantasy of saving this poor African guy, who's oppressed, right? And so we get to a point where I'm summarizing this whole story, but we're getting to the point where I'm working on this collection. And in working in this collection, we had the same kind of process. I'd write a poem, send him the poem, he'd have a look at it, we'd workshop the poem together. But this time, I'd send him a poem, I'd meet up to have a workshop with him, to workshop the poem with him, and it would always become this debate, and he's trying to tell my story, he's trying to tell me how to write my story, what to add, what not to add, and it never became about the technicality of writing a poem. It became the content. He was trying to tell my story for me in a way that fit his Marxist lens. And so that continued on until he realized that I wasn't going to change my story, and in fact I was developing my own ideas which to him were against his ideas, and therefore he could no longer work with me. So according to him, my work and my story is Islamophobic, and therefore he had to withdraw from working with me because according to him, I've become a right winger. He'd accused me so many times of being a right winger, and it's hilarious because he had such fear of the right. I had such fear of the right that somehow I wouldn't be able to, that I wasn't capable of thinking for myself, that the right wing was somehow going to just swoop me up, and I wasn't gonna do what. Well, for him, I didn't have the capacity to think. I did, but he didn't like it. So anyway, so long story short, he ended up withdrawing from working with me. So I found myself, and I'm like, oh, Jesus. What? Because we were, towards the end of the process, and he withdrew from working with me. So I was like, oh, goddamn, okay. This is the racism of the left. The moment you decide to not be a victim, they tell you exactly what they try and. They try and do things to you to make you victimized, you see. So he was trying to take my voice away from me. He was trying to, because I didn't submit, I didn't listen, I didn't obey, I didn't give him the position of, my this parental figure. But it's based on racial lines. Then my voice didn't matter anymore. You see, and so I'm going to read the poem. The Great Debaters. I fled my home to be free in 2015, and found myself in your classroom. I saw the belly of altruism spread across your desk, stretched open like a plastic bag. It looked so hungry, and it looked at me, half flirting and half tipsy. Mother tore me apart in my room, then turned my older brother into a ghost and fed my younger brother till he could no longer walk. She sold my sister to colonizers with the same skin color as us and killed my father along the way. But things fall apart during war, and grief oriented me to more of what life had to offer. I can teach you the way, he said, as though he was a Christian missionary. But he was certain there was no God except for the one locked in his head, and his words started to feel like boiling water scorching through my body. I discovered he was wrong when he stood on the podium with all the freedom in the world, proclaiming the West had eaten me, but I ran to Footscray instead of Hargeisa. And when class was over and he ushered me to his desk and insisted it was colonialism that had made my mother do it, he could no longer stand so tall in front of me, for he had sinned like his forefathers and made it appear beautiful by confessing his sins as a racist, anti-racist, a philosopher created by the God chained in his head, now drunk. Michael, the old Marxist professor, the failed North Star, lost in the dark. He is no Melvin, who led his students to knowledge, but a man crippled in his ivory tower, watching over us in the east as we scatter in the pouring rain like ants, seeking refuge from the torment of a 7th century book made in the desert that starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Yeah, guys, that's the poem, The Great Debaters. I recommend you guys watching the film. It's an amazing film. But yeah, that's the poem, and it's one of those stories that, one of those experiences that I'll remember as a very strange kind of dynamic. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot because when I left Islam, I thought the left would embrace me, but then I learned the hard way that no, the far left are not going to embrace me because they've gotten in bed with Islam. So that my story, like the thing that I keep on experiencing, is that my story is an inconvenience to many people. You see, whether it's the left, and whether it's being gay as well, because for those of you who don't know, I'm anti-woke. Really, I detest the woke, and so the LGBT world has largely gone in bed with this woke ideology, has been affected by this woke virus, and there again I'm sort of I'm an outlier to that as well, because I don't lead with being gay, although I am gay and I am proud of that. It's who I am. But I don't lead with it. You see, and I think it's normal. I don't think it's not a part of my personality. That's a whole can of worms altogether. But yeah, I just wanted to tell that story, and sort of just kind of unpack that story, because it was such a strange kind of moment in my life, realizing that a person had decided, what role you're going to play in their life, and that role is going to be a subservient role. I will never understand his ability to just look me in the face and just see me as an object with which he can fulfill his altruistic white savior fantasy on. It's simply amazing, and fundamentally, for someone who was against racism, what he ended up showing me was that he was in fact a racist, but just a savior type, and the fact that he thought that it was okay for him to question and leave his religion. That's fine. Freedom was him. It was for him. It belongs to him. But freedom does not belong to me because of where I come from. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll every so often I'll come back and I'll read more poems in the collection. But I'll leave all the relevant information in the description box. Again, like, share, and subscribe. All right, bye, guys. Love you all. Peace out.